Yes, it is. All right. Can I take you back to being small, please? Because you are still sharing, man. Right? So did I stop sharing? Share. Screen two. Share. All right. I think it's share. All right. So before was to give us context in the sense to really kind of look at a timeline from a decolonized perspective. It's important to note, in the sense from our last conversation, that around 1500, we began to see this sort of upheaval or change. Around 3200 BCE is when we really started to see the first civilizations, Mesopotamia and Kemet, in these organized ways. And then by the time we get all the way to around 1200, we see this time denotes really the fall of um, the Bronze Age era. And this is where the Iron Age starts. So in this time here between 1500 and 1200, we begin to see sort of this movement and mixing of people in a greater way. And we know that in the sense because different people begin to document this change. Even here, you see there's the Indus line, and then it breaks, and you see India start. So India, as we know it today, truly starts after around the 1500s, around when the time of the Iron Age comes in. So the Indus civilization is a separate civilization than the civilization of India that we know today. And what really begins to mark that change is these people who begin to start migrating. Some people may say invading. But so before we talked in Kemet, you had the Hyksos invasion up here around 1600 to 1500. These people ruled Kemet for about 100 years. And then what we would say is Upper Egypt, which is deeper Africa, along with Nubian kings and kings of Kush, rose up, pushed the people all the way out up into Syria. So this is a well documented um, sort of immigration story. To talk about these people who lived in Lower Egypt, they wind up taking over, and then they wind up being assholes and getting kicked out of the land. But the interesting thing about these folks, we go past all those folks. Well, that was sort of telling this story about the kingdom of Cush and Upper Egypt drove the Hyksos out. They had these fights back in this time, and you can even see how they sort of decorate these people to show them with these coats of many colors. And so, if you read about Joseph, one of the things in the Bible that they really talk about are these that he had this coat of many colors. And the Egyptians or Kemetic folks clearly drew these West Asian people or Semitic people, they drew them in a way to show them with all of these colorful clothes, if you will. But let's see, getting besides that. So that whole time is what really kind of brings about this new dynasty that was the first monotheist. And so even when we're talking about, say, Kemetic yoga, in these ancient times, these people had their own postures. And so this really comes from a book I did not bring in, I meant to bring in, but it's from the Summit Institute of Yoga, Dr. Mutar Ashby, Yoga Skills School of Kemetic Yoga, Yasir Rahotep. Yasir Rahotep is the only person you can get a Yoga Alliance certified Kemetic yoga teacher training from. So his school is in Chicago, but basically he is the person that really introduces this understanding of Kemetic yoga. So the postures, the sema tawi means union of the two lands. And so bringing these two lands together was this kind of seminal moment within Kemet. There's there's like this shield or this tablet of Narmer that really sort of denotes this time of Narmer being the first pharaoh to bring together Upper and Lower Egypt. Before they had these two different crowns, and then these two crowns come together. And so they use this sort of union of the two lands to symbolize this kind of dual understanding that we would call Tawi. And this is what he's labeling as his Kemetic yoga understanding, right? The duality within us, masculine, feminine, spirit, matter, ego, soul. We're always, in a sense, talking about this duality, and even Kemet demonstrates an understanding of that duality. The semaplot, right, is the practice of postures, union with gods and goddesses. The postures help unite the body with spirit and restore energetic balance. Key postures include pose of immortality, uh, the Heteru pose, Sphinx pose, mummy pose, and these are some of the poses taken from this book that I'm basically mentioning and bringing up. I have a copy of. I just am not really a big fan of the book, nor am I a fan of some of the asanas, and only more so because we were talking about doing things in a sense of safety. And so, what I love about Kemetic yoga, and I think a lot of people will say once they've done Kemetic yoga, is why I included this piece, is that the postures help unite the body with spirit and restore this sort of energetic balance. So to be sort of invoking the ancestors, invoking this more kind of Kemetic wisdom can be an empowering thing, I think, damn sure, as those of us who may identify as African American. So I don't necessarily say anything bad about Kemetic yoga other than I would probably want to introduce it to more able-bodied individuals. That's, I think, the one thing I can say about Kemetic yoga. And so you see, these are all images and pictures you may see within hieroglyphs, and quite literally in hieroglyphs. Huh? So really? Yes. And so in the sense of looking at the hieroglyphs, then they've taken yogic poses and sort of given them that kind of understanding. So a spinal twist, Indian spinal twist, sitting in lotus, you see the two folks. The wheel, this is a well documented image. And truly, you'll see this image in the sense of, as I believe, Newt, she's the goddess of the sky. And so you see stars and things on her back. And so her kind of having this back bend is sort of this representation of the sky. Let me make sure that I'm not speaking on my ass. Yes, Newt. Look at me. Yeah, Newt, goddess of the sky. And so, how she's featured, if you will, you'll see her with stars and things on her back, and she's doing this wheel. And so, she represents the starry sky. But that's that upward bow pose that you see. So, that's truly a picture of Newt, which, again, well documented, back bends, you see all throughout different hieroglyphs. So this is probably the most I'll touch on Kemetic yoga. I may go into some more Kemetic wisdom and maybe draw out some poses. I kind of go back and forth over it, but I'm still sort of on the fence. What?
So then yoga technically like was first started in China.
Well, yoga again, as why I wanted to bring out that these people now, right? So within Kemet, they had their own system. The Mayas had their own system of understanding of. So you'll see their hieroglyphs of games and things that they were performing. So even in the sense of the Popol Vuh, this is what we're calling this revealed knowledge. So when you hear within a Christian standpoint, they'll talk about revelations, right? This was revealed to me by God. Uh, Moses going up on the mountain and getting the Ten Commandments. What is revealed to us by God is something that happens in us when we're in these ecstatic states. So when you're laid out in a shavasana, when you're meditating, then these insights and moments of clarity can come to us. So I say all that to say that every ancient culture has this clarity that has come to them. And there, in the sense of been people evoking this more kind of common sense or reason. So within the Enlightenment movement of the Americas, of what we know, that now there's a great book by Thomas Paine, one of the founding fathers. It's called The Age of Reason. What they find is that if you compare things to one another, then we can all like come to a reasonable understanding of something. But we have to base this on our inquiry. So the scientific method being this thing to say that we always have to question, that we never get to say, no, this is it. We must always discern. Again, this is a spiritual understanding. So those of us that recognize that it is important for us to discern can all come to this same kind of conclusion, which is why the United States is based on debate, to be able to speak facts and evidence to folks, not just to say, well, this is in the Bible or the king said, but can we all sit down with our own mental faculties and deduce what is? So this is this great enlightenment that Europeans finally come upon, but this understanding is what all ancient civilizations go back to. In order for them to even be called a civilization, they had to be able to have government, hierarchy, or of a society and a spiritual practice, and to allow all these people to sort of work together in mass. So when we're talking about yoga, which is this sort of union of spirit and universe, God, whatever it is that you want to say, then this is what they're all talking about, right? How to overcome our dark forces, find that light, so on and so forth. So yoga being again in that definition of what we would say. Going all the way back. I took it out. Uh, we got to it out. The yoga, in the sense of what we would say again, is sort of uniting these dual aspects of us to really kind of come back to this cosmic order. This is the founding principle of Kemet. And so when we're talking about Ma'at, then the very things we're talking about in Indish yoga, we can find in Kemetic yoga or Kemetic mysticism. So yoga is a mystery religion. When we talk about a mystery religion, then we're talking about, again, a teaching of an outer aspect of and then an inner aspect of. So, yes, Kemet had its own yoga. They had a sense again of their own text that helped them find balance within themselves. This was the central thing that allowed them to even last for 3,000 years, is that they always had the ability to go back to these ancient texts that taught them how to find balance within themselves. That's the importance of the Hall of Ma'at, if you will, is to recognize that we had to find balance. We needed our heart to be lighter than that feather. So there again is another yogic teaching about our very spiritual self found within Kemetic text. So that's why I went through to give you all of these slides to take you through again these different spiritual principles that were these ceremonies, even the raising of the jade ceremony, what the importance of the lotus flower was in comparison to yogic tradition. And truly to get that when we're talking about where we believe yoga came from was the people in the Indus civilization. The people in the Indus civilization, you remember that these people spoke China, Indus, Mesopotamia, which would be these sort of red indicating civilizations, and then Kemet. So here in the green, here in the red, here in the yellow, all these people talk with one another. So the spiritual concepts and understanding that they had here was available to these folks and vice versa. But we can't read what the Indus people wrote. We still haven't been able to decipher what they wrote. So what we are actually reading when we're talking about India and we're talking about Sanskrit, this is the interpretation of the folks who began to invade India. Sanskrit did not originate in India or those people. It comes from the Aryans who begin to start coming down into the land. And so you remember again the Hyksos were people who came down into the land. They brought in these new kind of weapons and things like that. And so we see it in Kemet. Where did I not include that? Did I pull that out? I think I did pull that out. Uh, I think I did pull it out. Oh man, I pulled out the chariots and everything. Uh, yeah. Okay. Well, so before the 1500s, before the Aryans, these Hyksos and people started coming down, people did not have horses. They didn't have chariots. They didn't have like these long weapons, if you will. That was something that was new that got brought down. I'm sorry. It's really just because I want to geek out and at least just be able to demonstrate. And because I teach this class in different iterations, then I have different takes on this. Not the comments, not history of divine order. Just one second. That's what I think I can do that really quick. I need an overview. Uh, when you're so fancy that you're just slowing things down, it makes no sense. Okay, maybe it's not gonna work the way I thought. TT, 200 hour, history of that. Nope. All right. I guess I took it out in a few iterations. All right. My bad. I really need to include that for my own sake of what I like to talk about. Hmm. All right. Intermission over. But the point is that around that time, we saw these people beginning to start flooding in. And as they begin to come in
Right.
around 1500s, so because it's in the sense about the time it starts. All right. So about the time that it starts, so the Harappa civilization, which is the Indus Valley civilization, it lasts until around the 1500s. And then it begins to start going away. And we start seeing the rise of the Vedic time. And so it's around this time that we believe the first Rig Veda is written. And we say that because they sort of make references to landmarks and things that existed around that existed up until around the 1500s. And so, since the Rig Veda, which is the oldest Veda, references things that go back, then it's usually sort of, even though it's written around the same time as the other Vedas, around 900, they will usually sort of give it 1500 to say when it begins to come in and when these Aryans start recording the sages and folks that live um, in the region, right? So the Harappa civilization exists, and these folks is believed again to not believe because these folks still live in India today, where you'll see the white noses, the thick lips, the very dark skin. These folks live in India, just as what we learned that dark skinned people are sort of the roots of every place.
Wait, what's the data?
Who?
What's the data?
Veda. The Vedas are the first scripts or Sanskrit texts within yoga. We're going to cover those right after I just explain or go over again the Harappa and Mohenjo-daro Dravidian civilizations that go back 2800. So this is the original folks. This is what was dug up, how we know how they lived. They had all these little cities that was all up through what we would call India that went along that great Indus River, which is why it's the Indus Valley. And this is the seals that were found and how all these writings and things that we can't read or interpret, but this is all the kind of stuff found in those digs. One of the things found, or the thing that they love to point out, and I think is also very interesting, is you see this of where there's somebody obviously sitting in the lotus position. They have bangles, the little uh, bracelets that you see later on in tradition in India on their arms. There appears to be three faces. There's a front face, there's a side face, and there's a side face over here. So it has these three faces on it. Somebody sitting in lotus. You find another one with a more primitive person sitting again, what appears to be in lotus, arms with these bangles on them, and it looks to be these three faces again. And so in later tradition in Hindu culture, there is this understanding of the three faces of Shiva, creator, protector, and destroyer. And so you see these similarities of these folks again. And again, something else they dug up in the Harappa Mohenjo-daro civilization are these little figurines up top here. And so just like as I was demonstrating to you the yogic poses found within Kemet, then these all appear to be yogic poses for these little figurines that we find later in hatha practices. And so this dates back to 3000 BCE. Now, I also just demonstrate that back in the day that there was the Chinese understanding in Shang Dynasty, they worshiped Shangdi, was a supreme sky god. So they had their own understanding again, ancestral spirits, omens, power of heaven, and oracle bones. This is all stuff that you'll get. I'm just speeding through it because I made the history part so large. So like Wu were shamans. They had their own rituals, music, movement. their early idea of qi or the life force, it likely grew out of these traditions. So we see like the wisdom of China that still exists today when we start talking about the qi, that all dates back to around this time pre 1000 BCE. Same thing again around 1000 BCE. You see philosophy beginning to also take hold and be sort of the foundation of Taoism. Uh, the Taoism is it has its own cosmic vision. Taoism, the way. Yin and Yang is the cosmic dance. The left, right, up, down. Wu Wei is this effortless action, and then you have nature as a sacred teacher. So these different principles here are sort of the foundation of Taoism. The five elements, uh, the Qi again, and simplicity and inner stillness. This is their version of a mystery religion. Understanding again, they're speaking this deeper scientific understanding through these different principles. And so I've just given you sort of that timeline of kind of spiritual and philosophical understanding.
When was this in Shanghai's?
Um, 600 BCE is when the Taoist cosmic vision began to start taking hold. And so as we get towards 1200 and beyond, then we start finding archaeological evidence and proof of these things. So you can go back and see archaeological evidence of Taoism. But when you go before 1200 and you're now into the thousand, now there's like this new archaeology where they're beginning to start finding these traces of the things we see now more solidly written. So like Taoism is this well-known philosophy that's being taught today. But when we're talking about what the things that were believed in the Shang dynasty that goes back before that time, now we're beginning to find what are the roots of, say, Taoism. So this is why the mandate of heaven, uh, the Shang dynasty worldview, the Wu as shamans, all these are sort of these kind of uh, pre-Iron Age civilization understandings of China, because this again was the civilization that was in contact with Kemet, with Mesopotamia, with and with the Indus folks. So they all talked with one another. Oh, I talked all that shit, and here it is. Ah, okay, my bad. So there was these Indo-European folks. They're not Nordic, right? So not people from um, the north of Europe. They're people more in the like the Eurasian steppes, Iran, Central Asia, folks like that, right? Aryans begin to adapt to the conquered cultures that they started coming into. And so the things that we see that they do is they introduce horses, chariots, and we believe like climate change had a huge role in it because all throughout the area, so the Hyksos invasion of Kemet, 1650 to 1550 BCE, chariots are now introduced for the first time in Kemet. When we usually think of Egypt, you think of sort of chariots and folks riding, but that was all new things that came in the time after these Aryans bring it down. Also, in the Indus Valley, around 1500 BCE, we see Aryans begin to come down and they bring in what we call today these Vedic texts. So these are the first Sanskrit texts that we begin to see in the Indus Valley. And even the Hittites, again, another well-known people in the region, they encounter these Indo-European folks who come down and also introduce chariots in their own Indo-European language. So throughout this long swath of land around this time, we see these people beginning to start coming down. And here, over here, you see that they buried this chariot with these horses with the chariot to demonstrate the importance of. And so this is this marked difference that starts to take place in this time. And so when we begin to start talking about the Vedas, for me, what makes it important is that here is somebody that comes in and begins to document the sages of the time. And when you get like for most people, when you're talking about this wisdom, it was all oral. And so mystery religions, mystery cults were oral, and they handed it down based on the sort of master apprentice kind of way. So you'd have the priests, and then the people studying the priests, and then the priests would be teaching the new priests these ancient stories and texts and the meaning behind said things. And then in the sense with these folks who were these sages, they were these learned people who kind of lived in the forest of the land and now kind of had this wisdom.
Who is that?
So we would call them sages, but we don't necessarily know their names in that way. We just know their practices of going. So the what you may call shamans or the wise people of the Indus of the Indus Valley folks. So these were people you would call sages. Did I? I think I did. Yeah.
Wait, so I can go back to the other one before this person.
Here. And you know you have a copy of all this. I just always got to remind you. So yeah.
Okay.
And so when we also talk about again within biblical history, you talk about these people needing to go back and take folks' land. There was this kind of upheaval that happened at this time, but they've recorded it. They've talked about what that is. So you don't have to necessarily go on a legend or a myth when now you can actually read what the Hittites had to say about the invasion. You can even see again that there's just a marked difference in the Indus Valley writings and then what winds up becoming India as now you start reading Sanskrit. And I like to bring that up because people can be these traditionalists about yoga. You busted me out on the whole Sanskrit conversation. Uh, so people can be traditionalists about Sanskrit and saying the asanas in Sanskrit, but Sanskrit is not native to the people that we believe again invented yoga. That is what the people who now come there and now record this wisdom in is Sanskrit. So when you understand Sanskrit comes from the more Eurasian steppes, more Iran, then that's why I'm not necessarily somebody like, well, what are you talking about? Right? Like, who are you actually being beholden to? The actual knowledge of where it comes from, or just simply the tradition? Because are we really giving these people who it could have been invaders, but definitely were migrants coming into the area and recording this wisdom? And we know again it's a recording of that wisdom because they're writing down stuff and talking about places that no longer exist as they are writing it. So they're definitely getting it from other people who have already lived there. So when we're talking about the Vedas, finally, to get here to the Vedas means the knowledge. So the Vedas was this attempt to record this deep knowledge. And so there's two parts of it, which is the Shruti, which means heard, and the, uh-oh, did I not? There's the Shruti, the herd, and then not the herd, but did I not write it down? Shruti means that which is heard, and then there's the other one that we talked about in the sutras that means memory. So one is like what you remember, and the other one is what you heard. But I didn't write that down well enough to be speaking to it. But basically, when you're talking about the Vedas, you're talking about the Shruti again, that which is heard, which we again would understand that to be that they hear this from somebody else that they're recording it. And so each Veda, which there are four, it comes in two parts. There's the Karma Kanda, the hymns and rituals, which is the outer religion, right? What is suitable for the public. And then there's the Jnana Kanda, which is the wisdom or the inner, which are the Upanishads. This is only for special people to be able to understand, those who are ready to be initiated. So Karmakanda is characterized by rituals and ceremonies that strive to surpass the limitations of the mind. It's the philosophical interpretations of the hymns and rituals performed by the Brahmins, who were the priests. So the Brahmins were the ones who basically people would come to them and say, like, oh, well, I'm sick, or I'm having this problem or that problem. And so then they would give them the ritual, which could be, again, a hymn, it could be a spell to put on yourself, something to take for medicine, a dance to do to bring about rain for your crops, all of that sort of knowledge. The people would come, and then the Brahmin, the priest, would perform for them or prescribe for them, if you will. The Yanakanda again, which is the universal truths, right? Not ritual, but the wisdom behind the ritual. Why are we doing that ritual? Right? What life is about, what death means, what a human being is, and the Godhead that sustains us. These are sort of the questions that get answered in this deeper truth and this deeper wisdom. Right? This section again is known as the Upanishads. So whenever again you're referring to the Vedas, you're referring to this knowledge that's split again in a mystery way, the outer, which are the rituals, and the inner. There are four Vedas, right? And so they need to know to know they are the sacred scriptures of the Brahmanism that is the basis of modern day Hinduism today. They contain the oldest known yogic teachings. And again, they're called the revealed knowledge that was given to humanity. They were compiled in the Sanskrit language by rishis. These are divinely inspired seers or sages as these great yogis. But again, for me, what has been compiled from sages, um, I was the rishis in a sense compiled it from the sages, but and I'll just always sort of admit what is this blending of having to pull this apart because it's been colonized, is that they're still trying to say that the Sanskrit people were the folks with the wisdom. And that just could not be because they had their own knowledge, their own understanding that now they're going and interpreting what these people are telling them. So there's just why for me there's just still trying to kind of pull it apart. And so they say, right, like these were rishis, divinely inspired seers, but they weren't divinely inspired in that way because they were recording this from other people, which is why it means the herd. Anyway, preachers are also gifted with the ability to see the ultimate reality through their intensive spiritual practice. But if you were somebody who now you can read this stuff, you can write in this stuff, you can understand this stuff, then you were able to now interpret it for yourself. Yogis, rishis living in seclusion in forests were recorded. I put that down there basically to say that these actual yogis were people who were these um, secluded people who maintain this knowledge. Within yoga, there is the asrama. The asrama, there's four aspects of life. The asrama. So you are a student, right? So in your age right now, you are a student. Then you may be householder. And then from householder, there is a forest dweller, somebody who, if you've kind of lived the life and whatever. So as a student, you're like, oh, I'm trying to put together my whole life, if you will. So from that time you get to Saturn returns till you're about 28, then you're like, okay, I need to start kind of taking this serious and laying some roots down. And that makes you now a householder. So then you kind of a householder, you may have kids, you may get married, you may have your real job and whatever. You kind of get into the sort of rigmarole of the society. And then after the kids have kind of gotten a little older and whatever, now you're like, okay, that wasn't necessarily what I thought. And now you may become this forest dweller, or where you go off. People say, maybe this is kind of your midlife crisis. But now you want to kind of go off and really contemplate life, really kind of get a deeper understanding of it. So you may start walking away from things. Um, but so once you sort of live in the forest and you have this deeper understanding, then you become this renunciant. And so a renunciant is somebody who now renunci or um, they go against sort of material happiness. So anything that's given us this kind of material pleasure, you see these old people like telling you to love what is now, to really honor your time and your life and whatever. So these are the four stages of a yogic life. So when we are talking about yogis or rishis living in seclusion, they're in this forest time. So this is when they're going out to get that wisdom. And then they turn into these renunciants that now are going out, talking shit about society, if you will. And so Jesus would have been, in a sense, a renunciant. His 40 days and 40 nights is when he went off into the forest. And then he came back now anointed as the Christ, and ready to renunciate the priests and all the wickedness that he was seeing in the society.
Um, like this says that was compiled in the Sanskrit language by the rishis of the sages, but you're saying that the Aryans came in and talked to the rishis of the sages.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So, and for me again, I am taking this from the encyclopedia. I don't necessarily try and put what is my sort of complete spin on it. I give you what are sort of the facts. And so, but it's an interesting thing to really read again this to say that they compiled it in the Sanskrit language, compiled in the Sanskrit languages by rishis. And at the same time, they're saying that these yogis, rishis who were living in seclusion in the forest, like they were recorded. So wait, who recorded them then? Who understood Sanskrit? So there's kind of a bit of mental gymnastics that they're asking you to perform to make you think that the Aryans or the more lighter skinned people were the folks that bring you this knowledge. When they are clearly also saying within the text itself, no, this was recorded from these other people. This is Shruti. This has been heard from other folks. So that's sort of what I'm saying. As you start detangling it, you're going to get the darker skinned people saying that the Aryans invaded, and you're going to get the lighter skinned people saying that the Aryans migrated, right? This is just, as you start investigating the culture from an outside perspective, it's unfair for me to just say this is what is. I'm just always trying to give it in the bush that it was given because you won't find necessarily this complete straight line. Long and the short of it. So going through the Vedas again to say what they are and even understand their importance. Um, the oldest again is the Rig Veda. It is the oldest and largest. We know it to be so because it's written in a more archaic Sanskrit, an older version of the Sanskrit. It's filled with poetical hymns, verses dedicated to Vedic gods. the Brahmins, the Kashitaki, which are sort of these kind of priests, the priest class. Um, and then there is the Brahmana or the Upanishads that are all part of this. They talk about this cosmological understanding. And so this is something shared with Mayans as well as with the Kemetic people. They believe in an aerial, a celestial, and a terrestrial. So, and there is space, there is earth, and then there is an underworld. And so this gives us context of the very time space we're in. Uh, that's the importance of knowing that. So when we're comparing again these similarities, it's important to know that these people believed that the earth was still made up in this same fashion, an aerial, a celestial, a terrestrial. We see that broken down in the understanding of the gods, Tefnut, so on and so forth. So when we get to the Yajur Veda, this is about worship. See the Sama Veda is song, and the Atharva Veda is ritual. So what you're beginning to see is these kind of breaking up of schools between the different Vedas. So the Yajur is about mantras and formulas. So these would be like spells and things that you would put on yourself and other people. You have the dark or Krishna Yarjaveda, and then you have the bright or the Shukla Yarjaveda. These are different perspectives that contain these different types of mantras and formulas. Um, then you have uh, Satapatha Brahmana, which is another sort of separate book that exists within the Yarjaveda that kind of gives you this understanding of these different formulas of mantras. And then these are the different Upanishads listed here that are in the Veda. So the Upanishads are their own separate books of wisdom. They are, again, giving you the meaning of what the other books are sort of talking about. So, what is the depths of understanding the formulas through the dark and the bright aspects of the Yarja Veda and the Sakkatthana? Saying that as best I can. We get over to the Sama. Now we're talking about chants, songs that can be performed, if you will. It's the shortest of all four Vedas. It takes verses from the Rig Veda. And the Ganya is a four melody collection. The Archika is a three verse books. So these are books basically just these different song collections of songs and chants. And then you have the Chandogya and the Kena Upanishad that's attached to this Veda. And then finally the Atharva, which is hymns that are thought to be for surgery, medical treatment, charms, curses, magical formulas. Again, all things that help people get well within their lives. So this would be thought of as their kind of their medical book. And then there's the Kapatha Ramana, which is still just another text within the Vedas. And the Mandaka and Mandukya and Prashna Upanishads are found in that Veda. So the Upanishads is the inner wisdom, and then everything on top of it is the outer wisdom. The Vedas are one of the hardest texts to try and read. I have a Vedic book, and it's all of these little short stories that you have to sort of know the deities and people that they're talking about to give you the depth of the short story. So if they're mentioning this certain deity, then that deity is the god of this and that and that and this. And so because they're talking about him, then you infer all of this deeper understanding with what it is that you're reading. But where we really sort of pick up things in the sense of this is the low time of India. As things begin to pick up, then you get into the pre-classical yoga of where now you really get into the time of the Upanishads. And so they really kind of throw off the Vedas and they just go straight to the wisdom. And like, I'm tired of having to listen to these old men tell us what chants and whatever. How about we just go read the Upanishads for ourselves? So the Upanishads, Upa, Ba, Ni, Neither or Nether, and Shat, sitting. It is usually interpreted as sitting near the feet of the teacher. So to be reading the Upanishads is almost being taught directly by the teacher. And just some quick little bullets about the Upanishads. There's over 200 scriptures of the Upanishads. It's the conclusion of the revealed literature. And there is the Muktika canon of 108. So where you will find, in a sense, the most respected canon of Upanishads is the Muktika. In the Vedas, there are 13 Upanishads that are known as the Vedanta. So the Vedanta Upanishads are some of the most respected because they actually are included in the actual four Vedas themselves. The Upanishads further explain the teachings of the Vedas, central philosophical concepts and ideas of Hinduism. They go from the mythical to the philosophical. And it's important. People always say, well, why do Buddhism and yoga seem to always kind of go hand in hand? Why is it kind of hard to really tell them apart in places? Because the wisdom of the Upanishads is shared with Buddhism and Jainism. The Buddha reads the Upanishads as his study on developing his own philosophy. And so Buddhism and Jainism, they both start with the yamas and the niyamas. So the first use of the word yoga introduced by the god Yama, god of Hindu and Buddhist traditions. So I'm just giving you just sort of these kind of quick bullet points because to cover these individual things will take a lifetime. The inner vision of reality resulting from devotion to Brahman. So when you're talking about a Veda, anybody or an Upanishad, anybody can write an Upanishad. They're still being written today. Because again, it's the inner vision of reality that results from this deep practice going to God, going to Brahman. So this is why there's an established respect to um, Upanishads that we have in the Muktika and the Vedas, because they're still being written today. Ultimate reality is Brahman. This is what's taught in the Upanishads. And the transcendent higher self is the Atman. So the Atman, the inner wisdom, and the Brahman, that greater outer wisdom. Atman's goal in life is union with Brahman, which is yoga. So this is pre-classical yoga where people study uh, the Upanishads, and I'm one of them. I really love the Upanishads. Within the Svestashvatara Upanishads, it's the first use of Maya in the sense where there's mitote or the delusion of said mind is found in the Yajurveda, the Ramyaka Upanishads. First to mention the Atman, and you find him in the Yajurveda. The Mandukya Upanishad is all dedicated to Om. So we're talking about Om, where it comes from, why do we say it? You read that Upanishad and it'll tell you basically from the oldest and most ancient understanding, the truth of understanding of Om, which is actually Ao, which comes from the Arthava Veda. So these Vedas have the oldest text when we're actually saying what are the roots of yoga, where does it all come from? If you've read the Upanishads for yourself, you can actually begin to speak to it. And quickly to just kind of cover the Buddha, I think the Buddha is just an important person to mention because you really kind of get to see the spread of this sort of wisdom. Uh, in about 6th century BC, he was born in the Himalayas. He's an actual person. The first Buddha was the Siddhartha Gautama. Um, he's the first Buddhist yogi. He was enlightened about the age of 35. Remember us talking about that the sort of Christ phase. Once we come out of our Saturn returns, then about 33, we begin to start taking on this deeper consciousness. Buddhism, it has its chants, monastic life, or being living in the forest, if you will. They believe in taking themselves out of society, and they are big into that meditation. He studied the Upanishads, and within the Upanishads, there is the dhyana, state of meditation within our yamas and niyamas. Uh, Dhyana, or I'm sorry, within our eight limbs, dhyana is the seventh limb in yoga. So that same understanding of that state of meditation, that dhyana that exists from the Upanishads, it lives in Buddhism, but then you can also find it as known as Chan within China. It's the same dhyana. Dan from Vietnamese, same dhyana, and Zen in Japan is the same dhyana. So you see again how there is sort of this movement of this knowledge across these ancient lands, that how the Upanishads has actually affected all of these people. So it is usually unfair when we're trying to say yoga is just these asanas, when we now understand yoga actually started as this deep philosophy before it even got to a point of just these individual asanas. And then we have still within pre-classical yoga, the Mahabharata. But the Mahabharata is truly better known for a smaller book in it that we call the Bhagavad Gita. And so the Gita is sort of this central tenet, the central book, almost a Bible of yoga, because it is just this pure teaching of yoga itself. So Krishna sets out to teach Arjuna. I was telling you that there's this person named Arjuna. So Arjuna basically represents our prakriti, the body, if you will, or ego. And then Krishna, the driver of the chariot, represents our higher self, our Atman, or our Parusha. This is the God's wisdom that lives in us all. But within the story, these are sort of these archetypes, if you will. So the Lord song is about 700 verses in the Hindu scripture. It is the oldest scripture that is devoted entirely to teaching yoga. It expounds on Samkhya and the eight limbs of yoga. The central point of the Gita is moksha or liberation. Um, we are to be alive means to be active. So we have to be active. And so well, let me just read through this. To be active, and in order to avoid these difficulties in our lives and in others, our actions have to be benign and have to exceed our egos. So to be benign, meaning that I'm not seeking wealth or just the simple pleasure in the sense of why I'm doing it. It's beyond me. It's something bigger than me. I'm doing it for the simple fact that it's the right thing to do or it's being good. So the story basically is telling you this story or this war. So the Mahabharata is telling you the story of these two families. Which I don't put in here, but I don't want to get that deep in anyway. I always like, there's a reason why I leave out stuff, and that's because you don't want to get so lost. Smriti is the other one. That is what's remembered anyway. So it's telling you the story of these two families. Let's just say one family is the family who's usurped the throne through sort of nefarious ways, and the other one, the Padavans and the Kauravas, they are supposed to actually have um, the throne. They're the good and the righteous, and the others the unrighteous. So then Arjuna is head of the. I always hate just being wrong. He's head of the good family. Let me just be safe with that. He's the head of the good family, and then you have a cousin who's the head of the usurper family. They both go to Krishna and they say, "Hey, we're getting ready to fight this war, and we need your help." And so Krishna says, "Okay, I'll give you both two choices. One of you can have my army, and the other one can have me." And so Arjuna was like, "Well, shit, I want you." Krishna and the other cousin was like, "Well, hell yeah, I want the armor, want the weapons and all that." So he's like, "Okay." So then they go out to have this battle, and then they get into the chariot, and Arjuna tells Krishna, "Drag me out in the middle of this battle. I want to go and face down any family member who dares challenge righteousness, who dares stands against what is right and what is good." And so Krishna drives Arjuna down into the middle of this battle, and then Arjuna looks out and sees his family, his uncles, his like granduncles, people he was raised with, and now recognizing he had to go battle with them, he got weak in his knees and he drops his bow and he just falls down and he refuses to fight. And so within the Gita is this first kind of chapter that talks about the despondency of Arjuna. And the importance of that is that we all have our excuses on why we don't want to act, why we don't want to act as our higher self. So Arjuna gives all these excuses in a sense of not wanting to kill his family. I don't want to go out and kill or harm my family in that way. And Krishna tells him, well, you're taking this wrong. You're looking at their bodies, their prakriti, as them and not their spirit, right? They are possessed by a demonic force, if you will, that's having them act in this negative way. So you are commanded to act, to go to war, in a sense, against all evil or shadow forces. So Krishna basically now knocks down all of Arjuna's excuses to tell him to now go and fight this battle, but go fight this battle through the practice of yoga. So the rest of the Gita is explaining to Arjuna how to fight the war that you must wage within yourself and the world around you through yoga. And it basically gives you these three facets of life: bhakti, which is our loving devotion; jnana, which is our knowledge, right? What we get to contemplate or think about from our said past. And then karma, which is about our selfless action. So if I am devoted and I am in and acting in knowledge and in this selfless way, then I'm able to sort of practice this yoga. So the Gita unifies Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Karma Yoga, and it is because of this that it has gained this importance, because it is always, in a sense, trying to teach us how to sort of walk in this balanced way of life. Interesting that I have that hovering over that little picture you see down there. That is by Vyasa, the compiler. He's an important figure within the Mahabharata. He's considered the person to write it, but he's a character in it. So when we talk about legend, just like the Book of Moses, most scholars don't consider him the actual author of the Mahabharata. They, in a sense, are you may see him as a figure in a sense who represents the Smriti, which is that which is remembered. So there's the two, I was telling you before, there's the Shruti, which is what is heard, and then there's the Smriti, which that is what is remembered. So as we get into stories like the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, now you're speaking in the sense of these kind of like historical battles or stories that they use to sort of tell these myths and these deeper truths. And last, this is not to be taken literally. So funny, I got into this argument with Raja, who takes this literal to say that there was this battle and these people went to war. It is supposed to be considered again a myth. Yes, they may have used people and places and whatever, but again, it's to try and tell us a deeper truth. So the chariot represents our body. The driver of our chariots of our body is supposed to be our Atman or our spirit. Within the Katha Upanishad, the god of death, god Maya, explains to uh, Nachiketa that for him to find out how to be this immortal self, he needs to master the city of the 11 gates. And so this is the city of the 11 gates. And here are our gates. And then it's supposed to be where one closes at the very top of our heads and also our ears. So these are all our gates, basically our senses. So again, in the metaphor of the body here, then the Atman is supposed to be the driver of our chariot. The Atman or the Purusha should be the mayor of the city. So I should be acting from my spirit and not from my senses. And so the two armies in the battle represents demonic nature and divine nature. What is again of the spirit and what is of the flesh. The reins of the chariot. This is our kind of thoughts. This is our mind. So I put within the circle is like the energy from and the radius that goes out. And so that radius that goes out represents our thoughts, our connection from spirit to body. And when we have that connection, then we give that connection meaning. So there is where we have the mind, being the reins of the horses, right? And the horses are the senses. So the eyes, the ears, the nose, and the tongue. And so the senses may taste, touch, hear, see, but then the reins are going to interpret that and now tell us what it is that we are encountering as our chariot is moving. If we allow uh, the 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 rider within the chariot, which is Arjuna, and you can't really see here, but the flag that's over Arjuna is a monkey. So we don't want Arjuna driving the chariot because the monkey is just gonna be like acting all crazy. So that we don't want the monkey interpreting what the hell are coming from the horses because it'll drive the fucking chariot crazy. If we allow the spirit to drive the chariot, then we can actually be a person that's discerning. Someone is being a thoughtful individual or a learned individual who's driving our chariot. So there's sort of the metaphor of the Gita and the importance of it. We're gonna, because you have a copy of the Gita, we're gonna go through and read some parts of the Gita to get a better sense of understanding of it. But for me, it is unfair to have anybody walk away from a yoga teacher training and not have broken down some key points to the Gita because it's so central. Even if you want to say what is the first yoga mat is explained in the Gita, even though nobody would, of course, get certain kind of grass, stuff like that, that you can only find in India. But anyway, that's the Gita. I'm giving a little bit of insight to it. Samkhya is sort of the tree of life that you would see within Kemetic time, but it's kind of the breakdown of matter and how we get around through life. So I was telling you before, there's the Purusha, which is that inner consciousness that then connects to our Prakriti, right? The unmanifested or primordial matter. This is everything that exists. From that sort of connection or duality of ourself, we get the Ma'at or the Buddhi. It's the first principle of individualization, individual individuation, sorry, intelligence, discrimination. So this is our coming into this sense of our individual self, which gives our ahamkara or our ego. This is our allowing or our self identity. Then that self identity it gets split into these different natures. So there's a sattvic nature, a rajasic nature, and a tamasic nature. So the sattvic is the illuminated lightness, kind of an airy fairy sort of person. There's the rajasic, which is the impelling. This is somebody that's like kind of what would you say, Scorpio, kind of Leo sort of individual, somebody that's really like about it. And then there's the tamasic, which is kind of the stable or solid. Some people would say slow or even kind of dumb, if you will. But these are sort of natures within our ego. We really kind of break into those when we talk about Ayurveda. So Ayurveda teaches you, there's a little test that we'll do next week that tells you what is your kind of nature that you can draw from yourself. But once you sort of kind of split between the mind and the five elements, then you get into again what are the senses and then our active instruments in the sense of us actually like speaking, holding, moving, doing. And then the other one in the senses are kind of hearing, teaching, seeing, tasting. That's that aspect of our mind. And then the other part of our ego gives us these kind of subtle elements, earth, water, fire, air, space. This is again just philosophical understanding of the elements of nature and how we are sort of in what you would get into in astrology, things like that. Like what what is your nature, and now how should you adjust in your being? So like Rajasic people will like hot food. They're like fiery people. Sattvic people are more, like I said, more kind of light, airy, kind of Aquarius kind of folks. And then Tamasic folks are more kind of like you maybe think of thinking like Capricorns, like stubborn, stable, kind of like earthbound folks. That's sort of what Samkhya is that sort of accurate knowledge that they use to sort of break down these yogic principles. And why I include this is that you may see a similarity of even looking at the deities within Kemet, of how it started with Ra, and then began to come down and disseminate to these different deities, sort of same nature within that system of a tree. Moving on. The Yoga Sutras, what we are currently studying, this is when we get into classical yoga. So now, when we start really thinking about the roots of what we practice today, can really go back to the Yoga Sutras. So, as we are talking about Patanjali's a collection of 196 Indian sutras, they are on the theory and practice of yoga. They were compiled around 400 CE, or actually begin to start contemplated around 400 BCE, but they're finally fully compiled around 400 CE. This is when they get popular and they're written down. Sage Patanjali is who synthesized and organized the knowledge about yoga from the older traditions. So we believe that he is somebody that took this from the Vedas and the Upanishads and now wanted to give it this sort of kind of shorthand or speak it to his people of the day. Each individual is a composite of matter, prakriti, and spirit, purusha, just what we were looking at within the understanding of Samkhya. The two must be separate in order to cleanse the spirit, a stark contrast to Vedic and pre-classical yoga that signify the union of body and spirit. Basically, though, there is having this knowledge. And so when I can separate out what is matter and what is spirit, now that's going to help me sort of clean out my mind. So there's actually the union that exists once I'm able to disseminate the difference between Parusha and Prakriti. It's not in a sense to say that just because you're separating it means that you're not unifying these things. It definitely is still unifying, but first I have to distinguish the difference between the body and the spirit. Patanjali's concept was dominant for some centuries, and some yogis focused exclusively on meditation and neglected their asanas. It was only later that the belief in the body as a temple was rekindled and attention to the importance of the asanas was revived. This time, yogis attempted to use yoga techniques to change the body and to make it immortal. Now, it's important to get that yoga goes in and out of understanding. And so in around 400 CE, people are now more in this mental contemplation. And even within the Gita, that's still more mental yoga or more, the only asana was to be seated. So even here, the only asana is to be seated. But later they started to find out that it was important for us to really look at the body to start teasing out what shadows and things that we might have had going on. So what you'll see is in the post-classical period, we get Tantra. So around about the 8th century, the spiritual tradition that now starts to talk about this physical body. So Tam means expansion and Tra means this liberation. So expansion and liberation. The word Tantra means to weave or expand. So the weaves the dynamics of other mythical practices, astrology, Ayurveda, crystal, and gemology. So they're bringing in these sort of outside understandings to help people have this deeper understanding of this liberation. Tantric practice aims to expand beyond perceived limitations of yogic philosophy and the asanas. So Kundalini and the chakra system is us really looking to sort of raise this deeper understanding or sensitivity within our bodies. So union of opposites, Shiva and Shakti, male and female energies, awakening latent spiritual energy, especially through the practice of Kundalini awakening. So the most popular thing people talk about within Tantra is that there's like a lot of sex in a sense associated with it. But that's more in a sense to raise your energy, your sexual energy, to a point to where you're just with the energy and you're not taking it all the way over. So somebody practicing tantric sex is somebody looking to get right up to climax, but not climaxing. So like if you do so like within Kundalini, when you raise your Kundalini and you're doing like that breath work, you're raising this energy. And if you don't have a good constitution of sense of self, of even what you're doing it for, then it can bug people. So raise their energy and now they're not they don't know necessarily what to do with it. So in a lot of places where you may hear people get into orgies and things because they're raising their energy and they don't necessarily know what to do with it, so then they just go back to their base self. Or the guru or the teacher that's over that is allowing them to sort of waste that energy when the point is for you to get to an ecstatic state and now channel it to something, right? So it's like if I was raising my energy, right, to like shoot out a lightning bolt, then I need to be able to direct it to where I'm going to shoot it. If I don't have no place to direct it, then that energy can kill me, if you will. It's like teachings from like the Avatar. So we're raising that energy, then we need a intention behind it so that I know where to direct it when I bring it up, as opposed to just having it and it just be this experience that people are just wasting. So this is why you see cults form because they just want to be in this ecstatic state all the time. But if you're not doing anything with it, then it could be more harm than good. So this is my kind of cautionary tale about tantric practices, about raising your energy in that way and not having it directed in a place of good, if you will, right? So that's me really kind of talking about tantra, raising that energy. What happens when you can now have this hype power, and then where some people just pervert it, if you will. And so, speaking of, in a sense of ways to not pervert, what we begin to find as tantric yoga, and tantra becomes popular within the post-classical period, is you get this little book here called the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. So when we're talking asanas today, this is the foundation of that. The the yoga that we do today that is asana intensive is hatha yoga. It all goes back to this first book, right? So people no longer strive to liberate a person from reality, but rather teaches one to accept it and live in the moment. They remove the yamas and niyamas as those ethics because they want to just go straight to kind of like purifying the body or looking at the body, even though understanding that the yamas and niyamas were that same purification. It's basically a niyama. The niyamas start with purification. They just removed that sort of that tradition to create their own. Uh, about the 1100 CE, you get the first hatha yoga um, or you get the first hatha yoga asanas. The asanas, pranayama, mudras, nada. These concepts really go back to about 1100 CE with the actual writing of that first book, the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which is actually light on yoga. It had 84 asanas. So light on yoga is basically meaning the book of yoga. So when um, but when Iyengar writes his light on yoga, he's basically redoing the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. 84 asanas. Pradipika means self-illuminating. There's 6 steps to purification. Oh, I hate that I be changing that. So there's the neti. And so if you ever seen somebody with a neti pot, they take a neti pot, they pour it in, it drains through to clean out the nasal passages. That is the neti purification. You can buy neti pots today. You put a little salt in it. You let your nostrils drain. It's said to clean out your sinuses if you have allergies and different things going on. It's a way of cleaning. There is the Dwati, cleansing the digestive tract. Now, it's gonna sound a little crazy, but people would take a rag and they would swallow the rag. And then the rag is considered to go through and clean up, and then they poop it out. And so there's the Dwati, the cleansing the digestive tract.
That happened?
Very serious, yeah. Yes.
Can't be safe. What? Does it pass through?
Yeah. Anything you swallow is gonna pass through. Then there's the Nawali, which is the abdominal churning. And so you'll see very skinny people and they're making their stomach roll. And you see their stomach is kind of doing that rolling. That's called the Nali. It's abdominal churning. So they're kind of, again, cleaning out their abdominal area, cleaning out their digestive tract, if you will. Then there's the basti, a yogic enema, something you put up the butt, cleanse out your butt. Uh, Kapalabhati, skull shining breath. So breathing practices, again, pranayama breath to be cleansing. And then there's the Trataka, which is concentrated gazing. So if you were fortunate enough to have a Wii back in the day, we had meditation practice you could do, and it had a little candle that you would just sit there and focus on that candle. That's the Strataka or concentrated gazing. So you see yogis who would have a candle and they would sit just staring at that candle. And that was considered to be cleansing the mind of practicing that form of meditation. So this is the preliminary to Tantra, to Raja Yoga, to Kundalini Yoga, and to Kriya Yoga. So if you hear people talking about Tantra Yoga, they're basically taking a lot of their stuff from the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. Same people that teach Raja Yoga, Kundalini Yoga, and Kriya Yoga. So Kundalini Yoga does a lot of Kriya Yoga, which is a lot of the breath work, the excited breath work that's sort of doing that sort of kind of cleansing. And so here you go from passive to active practices. Earlier forms of yoga focus on passive meditation and contemplation. The Hatha Yoga Pradipika brought an active and physical dimension, making the practice more accessible to individuals who might struggle with purely meditative disciplines. And so we all learn differently. This is why there's these different, and you see sort of different books are going back and forth between saying, do a mind thing, or do a chant thing, or do a dance thing, or do a mind thing. And so it's because you have different voices, because we all like different ways to learn. Physical purification as a path to enlightenment. The text made physical purification and mastery central to spiritual growth, something that wasn't emphasized in early yoga texts like the Yoga Sutras. And so at no point is he talking about cleansing the body in the Yoga Sutras. You don't have any of those kind of neti pots or things like that. It's all mental or head stuff. And it's a preparation for meditation. It shifted the perspective to seeing physical practice like asana and pranayama, not to just as exercises, but as preparatory steps to help make meditation and spiritual insight possible. And so, knowing this from the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, this is why for me, I always say it is sort of an unfair thing not to have a respectful Shavasana, because the whole point of why I did all of that stuff was to prepare me to meditate. And so as you come into this time of what we're talking about, in the sense that there is, we are here in the post-classical time. And so here is the Hatha Yoga Pradipika that begins to pop up. And at the same time, you have the dark ages that have come about, and most of knowledge in a sense has been lost. But all down here, you see, this is where the writing of the actual gospel begin to take place. Here is the Council of Nicaea. And so I bring these about to say that it was at this time that there was the exoteric rise over the esoteric. And so the Council of Nicaea, the outcome of it was to affirm that Jesus lived and was a man and God manifests. That now makes a myth into this literal truth. And now that it's no longer myth, then we begin to lose all the knowledge that the myth things actually taught
How was, sorry, that was one.
The Council of Nicaea is right here, 325 CE. Council of Nicaea. And so you see what really happens is that Rome is existing, and Rome gobbles up all of the different civilizations that existed. And then by the time they get here, Rome begins to start falling apart. And so, here's the time of Plato, Mithras, and so around this time is the time of Cleopatra and all of that. And by the time you get to the end, Rome falls. And as Rome falls down, they want to sort of bring it back together. So you have Constantine, who's this emperor, who wins this great battle. And so he wants to use Christianity as sort of the state religion to help bind people and bring it back together. So then you see the remaining of Rome as the Byzantine Empire.
So now the Byzantine Empire begins to exist, but it's truly just them wanting to rekindle Rome. But this also, what we later know to be, is the formation of the Roman Catholic Church. So now the Roman Catholic Church begins to exist through what is the Dark Ages. So the understanding that these barbaric Europeans come up under is this time after Rome has actually fallen, they now are trying to regroup and create this sort of Roman understanding, and then you have Europe begin to start coming along. And all the way over here at the end, this is the enlightenment of Europe. And so when we're talking about the enlightenment of Europe, this is when they begin to start getting the knowledge that these people already had thousands of years ago, that they call them barbaric or pagans or whatever. And then these people come along to say that this is the right, true understanding of Christianity. And so, but they haven't even gotten esoteric truth and thought in that deep way as a full society until the Enlightenment here of Europe. But as we say that, you get that these folks have had this enlightened understanding this entire time. But by the time we get down to modern India, it has been invaded from these Dark Age Europeans. So around 1400, 1500, the Europeans begin to start striking out and invading people based on the understanding that they got from the Byzantine Empire. This is when the Bible is even canonized, and we get the Bible, sort of the Bible that we have today. Truly, you get King James's version of the Bible here around, or is that 14? I think it's supposed to be 11.
I did that right. Oh, 1611.
Right. So his Bible comes along about 1611, about 80 years before they get to their point of enlightenment. Now, the significance of that is that this is truly the understanding that we live under today. They're sort of backwards understanding through the King James Bible, and then have what is this Protestant Reformation. This is when these people finally say, you know what, I am sick of the Roman Catholic Church. And so you had the Protestants or the protesters come along who can now start reading the Bible for themselves to say, this is some BS. We can't believe any of this stuff that these people say. So now they started trying to form their own tradition, but the Catholic Church still remains.
That's the Protestant Reformation.
The Protestant Reformation are the protesters that are protesting against Catholicism. The only issue is that all they did was recreate Catholicism in their own image, and so they didn't really get as far away as they needed to, because they didn't understand all the stuff that actually happened here to recognize the depths of the Bible, right? And you are saying that the Gospels of the Bible are written here, and the King James Bible don't come until 1,000 or so years later, about 1,500 years after the first gospel was written. You can see how backwards these people are, especially if these people are in their dark age. They are actually illiterate and don't have a lot of understanding. They're the ones who are now interpreting the wisdom of a book that was actually written back in these first times days. It's just always wanting to give that bit of understanding.
When was the first Bible? Sorry to show up. When was the first Bible?
Depends on what you mean, right? Because the Bible means the book,
Christian Bible.
right? And so they are all a collection of books. So there was never a book. They've always taken a collection of books. So when we say the canon, when the Bible was finally canonized to the version of what we have today, then you would say it was first edited in the accepted way today at the Council of Nicaea. This is where they agreed on what is the canonized Bible.
What is Canada's?
Canonized means what is the official book, right? So there's all kind of gospels. There's only 4 gospels in the Bible, but there's all of these other gospels that exist outside of those 4. But only those 4 were accepted in the Bible. Go ahead. Got out talking about these Europeans and their perversion. Also within this, you'll get to see within on this timeline of where the Vedas somewhere is cursor that I can't see. All right. So you get to see where the Vedas start here. You get to see when I was telling Jainism, where Buddha first started, Kapali, Patanjali, the Gita. So I tried to mark in the sense of these sort of this spiritual significance of things that are said to happen. Now I put the Exodus there. There's no official date of the Exodus. This is just when it's believed that it could have happened and when I believe that Israel most likely may have started. But remember what I said that it wasn't until maybe around 900 that we actually have archaeological proof of the existence of these people. Everything sort of before this time, in the sense of biblical text, is more myth. But you even get to see Yuya and Tuya, I was saying, that are kind of precursors to Joseph, Akhenaten, precursor to Moses, Hyksos invasion, precursor to a mass exodus of a Semitic people, the different periods when the pyramids was first came, when the dynastic period first started, the Book of Gilgamesh, story of Noah, Sargon, story of Moses, so on and so forth. These are just a nice little timeline as a geek that I love to have. It's important to understand as we talk about the age of enlightenment, because this is important as we're talking about today's yoga, that around the 17th to 18th century, there began to be an emphasis on reason and self-inquiry. Right before that, we just believe what the king said, or let me see, they just believe what the king said or what the priest said. But what the Enlightenment started saying was, hey, we need to start reasoning and having self-inquiry, right? They use reason and critical thinking to challenge traditions, dogma, and authority. Liberation from ignorance, the Enlightenment goal, free society from ignorance, superstition, and tyranny through education and science. So this is the thing of where Europe was like, hey, this is the shit that we want, right? They began to focus on natural law, believed in universal rational laws of nature. Newton and Locke, these are just different people in the sense of people you can look up to kind of find this for yourself. Question of authority and tradition. Enlightenment thinkers, they challenged monarchy, religious institutions, and unquestioned social norms. So these people were progressives. They weren't going with just the old way. They saw human potential and progress. They believed humans could evolve socially, politically, and intellectually through reason. There was importance of this inner freedom. The Enlightenment political thinkers advocated for civil liberties and individual rights, Locke and Voltaire. The role of practice and experience, Enlightenment science. Knowledge comes through observation, experimentation, and reasoned proof. So this was this great breakthrough of the Europeans that, again, everybody knew in ancient civilizations. But it is because that this movement started coming about that you started to see the French Revolution and the different and the American Revolution, that they started to now believe these things. Now remember, it wasn't until about the 14 and 1500s when they start going out and conquering other lands. So they were still conquering other lands before they had got this enlightenment. So they were conquering other lands as barbarians, not as spiritual people. So now that these folks had gotten this sort of spiritual awakening, they start opening up to greater teachers. So you have this gentleman here, which is Swami Vivekananda. He is credited with bringing yoga to the West. He was influenced by his guru, guru means teacher, Ramakrishna, from whom he learned that all things were an embodiment of divine self. Therefore, service to God could be rendered by service to humankind. He adapted a Hinduist stance against the years of political and cultural religious humiliation, right, and culminated in the rise of bodybuilding practices such as Surya Namaskar or the sun salutations, as a way for Indian individuals and the society to rise up out of their cultural and political slump and vanquish their European colonizers. I absolutely love that. He later traveled to the United States, represented India at the 1893 Parliament of the World's Religions. Vivekananda conducted hundreds of public and private lectures and classes, disseminating tenets of Hindu philosophy in the United States, England, and Europe. In India, Vivekananda is regarded as the patriotic saint, and his birthday is celebrated as National, I think it's Yoga Day, actually. I think it's Yoga Day, and I put Youth Day. I need to check that out because I keep looking at that. I wrote this a long time ago, but the significance of Swami Vivekananda is he is like the Malcolm X because as Europe or England had taken over India, they're raping it, taking all their resources, and so yogis are attacking their trains and things, just being like basically like these Western heroes, if you will, and so the owners of the corporations and whatever at that time are writing back to England, like, hey, these freaking yogis and shit are fucking us up and doing na. So then they outlawed yoga. So you couldn't practice anything other than the sutras. So they wouldn't let you have the Bhagavad Gita. They wouldn't let you have the Hatha Yoga Pratipika or Tantric texts. But you can read the sutras, things that were more heady, more giving you be able to meditate and contemplate, but nothing that was going to make you this sort of free thinker to go out against the society. So it wasn't until Swami Vivekananda that he was like, no, let's bring back our yogic practice to help start building ourselves up and throw off these folks. So before Gandhi, before Iyengar, and even before their teachers, you had Swami Vivekananda that actually began to bring into fruition the Surya Namaskar or the sun salutations. So he is a very important figure in the lineage of yoga that we do today, and even how yoga got to the West, because you had these sort of free thinkers from this enlightened movement, like Charles Wickens, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Henry David Thoreau. Right, Charles Wickens, he studied Sanskrit under Kalanatha, a Brahmin Pandit. He began his translation of the Mahabharata into English, though he never completed translations. Portions were later published. So this was like the first introduction of the Gita and of this deeper understanding through this old white man here, Charles Wilkins. Right, the most important was his version of the Gita, published in 1785 as the Bhagavad Gita, or Dialogues of Krishna and Arjuna. In his preface, Wilkins argued that the Gita was written to encourage a form of monotheist or Unitarianism, to draw Hinduism away from the polytheism he ascribed to the Vedas. And so that's an important thing to get, that they still wrote it in their monotheistic bias or their closed-minded view of things. There was these other folks, they call themselves the transcendentalists, who maybe say in a sense of transformationalists. In New England, they were led by Ralph Waldo Emerson, who took a keen interest in the sacred writings. His friend and colleague Henry David Thoreau has been called the first American yogi. And so, probably the most famous transcendentalist that you know gave you one of the most popular cereals that you know. And that those people, actually brothers, are the Kellogg brothers. And so in their sort of these retreats that they have of where they were there trying to get people healthy, they invented not but cornflakes. And so they invented cornflakes as this health cereal in their transcendentalist retreat center. And that's where Kellogg's and even the Kellogg, Dr. Kellogg and where they come from. They were these transcendentalists. So the Kellogg cereal can sort of give sort of its lineage to yoga.
This one I was read by
What?
this book, or that was translated by him.
Oh,
That was
no.
by Street.
This is a different, yeah. No, this ain't, no. Yeah, no, this ain't his translation. Hell no. Like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Am I reading the uniform? No, no. His is just some of the first, in the sense. But again, the importance of him is to recognize that these people give you these first entries into this. Even I have a copy of the book of the Going Forth by Day, Book of the Dead. It was interpreted by Wallace Budge, who was this racist, whatever, but it still is the cleanest version that you could find. So no matter what, because they opened it and started the dialogue, we have to kind of go back to them because if they hadn't, we wouldn't know it today. So thankfully, they've uncovered all of this truth for us to find for ourselves. And I love this quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson: "The purpose of life is not to be happy. It is to be useful, to be honorable, to be compassionate, to have it make some difference that you have lived and lived well." As we now in our modern yoga, so LA has been this hub of yoga. And so LA being this hub of yoga, we owe that to this white woman. I say it like that, Indra Devi. And so I love sort of kind of bringing this out. I know it's kind of fucked up, but she would be upset about this. But so Indra Devi, she was born in 1899. She lived to 2002. She had this fascination with India that began when she was like 15, when she read this book by a poet philosopher, Mr. Tagore, and a yoga instruction book by Yogi Ramacharaka. In 1927, she sailed for India and adopted a stage name that sounded Hindu, using Dev, the Hindi root for God, and acted in Indian films. So she basically called herself Indra God. So I bring that up to say I told you Raja had taken the name, and she didn't know what it stood for. But anyway, so this interesting story here, right? There's the famous yoga guru Sri Tirumali Krishnacharya. This is in our lineage of yoga. He is considered the father, if you will, of it. We'll discuss him on the next slide. But he accepted her as a student thanks to the British Raj. And in 1938, she became the first foreign woman among dedicated yogis. Now, it's a few things that you kind of got to get. Before this time, really women wasn't accepted into yogic school in that way. And you got to get that the point that Swami Vivekananda wanted was to build it up to build warriors. to begin to fight against the British rule. So that was the reason why a lot of women weren't necessarily accepted within the Mysore temple, but women did still practice yoga. They just, in the sense of the popular thing and what we know, women weren't in it for that reason, not because they didn't believe women should not do yoga. But because of her, she wound up forcing the British Raj, right? And so Britain installs their own king. It's not the Indian Raj, it's the British Raj. So he basically now forces Krishnamacharya to take her in to his school. And so you got to understand, she's just some 15-year-old white girl traveling around the world. She got to be rich. She got to be connected. She's starting in films. So she's part of uh, colonized world, if you will. And she's forced her way into it, which is how she really kind of gets this prominence. So she removed the religious aspects of yoga. So all she did was just make it this exercise. In 1939, she held what are believed to be the first yoga classes in China and opened a school in Shanghai. Shanghai, again, was part of China that was taken over by Britain. Um, what I forgot what that section is called. They just back, I think in the 90s, they just basically gave that part of China back to China. But again, this is a Britain-controlled aspect of China. Thanks to the Partition Act of India that happens in 1947, there winds up being this sort of upheaval. And so she doesn't necessarily go back to India. She now moves and goes to Hollywood. And so she opened the first yoga studio in Hollywood. The Partition Act, if you don't know, is where they divided up Hindus and Muslims. And so there wind up being this great war within India to where they created Pakistan, and then India was set for just the Hindu people. So that sort of upheaval made it not necessarily so nice for foreign people to live there as they started to they gain their independence, if you will, thanks to Gandhi and his nonviolent movement. So because she builds the first school here in LA, in Hollywood, she teaches all of these ancient stars you don't probably know anymore, but we were forced to have to watch these chicks on TV. So Greta Garbo, Eva Gabor, Gloria Swanson, they were all these very popular white women in the day and whatever. And probably they were the precursors to Marilyn Monroe, if you would think of it in that way. So, and then also among her students was these other folks, Robert Ryan, Jennifer Jones, and this violinist that older folks would know. The younger folks are like, ooh, what? But because she had now made yoga popular to the Hollywood scene and the artist scene, this is why yoga is so big in LA. So Indra, she also recorded several instructional talks on yoga in the 1970s, including Renew Your Life with Yoga. This was a very important and big book you can still read and get to this day. In 1985, she moved to Argentina. In 1987, she was elected president of honor of the International Yoga Federation and Latin American Union of Yoga under the presidency of this other person. Basically, she wound up being this world-renowned yogin. But when we talk about why women are so big in yoga today, why yoga is so big here in LA, we owe this to Indra Devi. And so problematic, yes, but still an important precursor to how we get to the yoga that we have in our modern understanding. But in the true depth of that understanding, you have these four individuals here. Truly three today, as we not necessarily included Heart of Yoga the way we used to back in the day, but we'll start here at the very top to our left. This is Krishnamacharya, who I was telling you before. This is who Indra's Devi learned from.
So he revived and reinvented Hatha Yoga and influenced the dynamic yoga series of Patabi Joyce, the gentleman to the right, and the refined alignment of BKS Iyengar, the gentleman underneath Patabi Joyce. He's the and the classical postures of Indra Devi. The customized vinyasa that we do and many other styles, they all disseminate from Krishnamacharya up there. Off to the side, Sri K. Patabi Joyce. We're very respected and loved teacher. He was still alive when I first started my yoga practice. He developed a popular gymnastic style of yoga referred to as Ashtanga Vinyasa or Ashtanga Yoga. In 1948, he established his Ashtanga Yoga Resource Institute in Mysore, India. So Mysore, the Mysore temple is where all of this really sort of takes place. Underneath Krishnamacharya is his son, Desikachar. He writes this beautiful book called The Heart of Yoga. It's like, I think any yogi should read that book. It is very beautiful, talking about the essence of the practice. He had his own style of yoga called Vini Yoga, which today is pretty much kind of fizzled out because it's so funny and I'm 20 years in. So a lot of this, because I had written and got it from 20 years ago, I still kept it and included it because it still is relevant. But the further out we get, the more things like Heart of Yoga will start getting phased out, and you may only start learning about these other individuals. But I include the knowledge to say of who these people are. Um, Iyengar, basically, he is the one who did the new Light on Yoga. I was showing you the pictures right? Light on Yoga with the dude doing all the crazy poses.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's Iyengar. Um,
He's more about.
yeah, I believe so. As of probably last time I see, I believe so. I haven't. I think I would have heard Iyengar. Oh shit! Damn, it's been that long. He died 2014. Wow. Tell you how long I just been gone. How old these slides are too. Uh, He was the first to use blocks and straps. So when we're talking about these blocks and straps and bolsters, this comes from Iyengar. So we're talking about restorative yoga, yoga being used to heal bodies and things like that. This is the great contribution of Iyengar. The blending of Ashtanga and Iyengar yoga is what we know today as Vinyasa or power yoga.
The blessing or the blending of Ashtanga.
And Iyengar is the foundation, right? That's what Vinyasa yoga comes from. And so my teacher, who's still alive, is Dharma Mitra. He could do a headstand while I'm kind of good, at least in my versions of my head, because I got to learn from Dharma. He can do a headstand with no hands, and he would just bust it out in front of us. And we're like, holy shit. He's very old. And this is somebody who I think last I checked, he was still alive. Dharma Mitra. Yes, he's 86.
Where did you lunch with him?
Lisa, you say where? Lisa, who has the yoga there, my first yoga teacher, is friends with him. So she would bring him down to stay with her for like days and whatnot when he was going to teach. So he would teach special classes to the whole city. And then because he would stay with Lisa, then he would teach us classes and we could hang out and just talk with him when she would bring him out to do like big events and stuff. Yeah. So if you ever go to a yoga studio, you'll see like these posters and whatever. And these posters, what they are a bunch of yoga poses. So all the different little individual yoga poses, these are all Dharma Mitra.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's him doing, oops, oops, let's go further and further. So it's him doing all of those poses. And so over here, and again, these are all slides that you'll get. This is a little tree, kind of little yoga tree here. So I was telling you, Krishnamacharya is like the seminal teacher, right? From him springs a lot of our yoga. And above him, you see Swami Vivekananda, that also taught Gandhi and had influences on some of these other teachers that also influenced Krishnamacharya. And so underneath Krishnamacharya, here's Patabi Joyce, and there is BKS Iyengar. Right. And so under these two individuals, we come all the way down to some of these teachers here that even kind of cross. But over here is Brian Kess with Power Yoga. And so these teachers, Tim Miller, Chuck Miller, Brian Kess, even Lisa, all studied together at a studio called Yoga Works. And so Yoga Works wind up being this rock star yoga studio that everybody knew and everybody started coming to for the best vinyasa and power yoga you could do. And Brian Cass, still teacher, you can look up still teachers today. They had this just hell of a studio named Yoga Works, and that's even where Lisa had started developing her teacher training and where she would go to yoga classes. So when you talk about core power yoga, that today that they sold Yoga Works, and now core power yoga is Yoga Works, but not anymore because none of those teachers teach there. But that's sort of where we are today, to where what we see in the sense of the power, the vinyasa, all spouts from Yoga Works that later gets sold off to become core power. um, and Brian Kess was a teacher of mine. He would go to in LA. He would still do his yoga would be yoga by donation. But he would be like this cussing, shit talking yoga teacher. That again, so it's like the freedom I got came from a lot of these kind of first yoga teachers. But this kind of gives you, in a sense, a bit of the lineage of the yoga that we are talking about. And so, probably the most famous yogi that you know outside of that here is Bikram yoga. So, Bikram Chaudhry. So, when we're talking about hot yoga, then this is where hot yoga sort of disseminates or comes from. And you can even see a little bit of an influence as you get here to Baron Baptista Baptiste, that also begins to talk about vinyasa and power yoga. So you can see how hot yoga and vinyasa yoga still has some of its same lineages. But Bikram lied and said that he developed his own sequence or practice when actually he stole it from Vishnu Ghosh. Then you can see his actual practices and blah, 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 which again, they all were students under Yogananda and on back. But I just love this to kind of look so you can see sort of the lineages of the practice. But when we talk about modern yoga, as we wrap up here, we talk about modern yoga. For us, it had become important that people be able to see yogis that look like them, not necessarily it being sort of this kind of foreign thing, if you will. So this was our first
yoga class, yoga teacher training. It goes all the way back. And so you will always hear me talking about Raja. This is the white woman here in the center. She sort of started the tree. You see me over here as just one of the teachers and trainers. This was Jen DeRast. She did our anatomy. She was wife to Raja. And how I was introduced, one of my young sisters introduced me to Jen when they were first opening the studio. And so the owner of Black Bean LA, this is Allison right here, one of our first teachers, one of the owners of the tree today, my first student, Rita, is right here. Lauren, who does the kinetic yoga today, she's also one of our first students. She went taught in South Africa, and I think that's really about all the notable folks that still exist. And I pretty much still know just about everybody here. If you walk into the tree today, then McCoy here, which is just a love of mine, gives me free sea moss, and he's always comes give me these big, beautiful hugs. Just a beautiful individual. He put together this big brass tree. So if you ever walk into the tree, you'll walk into the lobby, you'll see this big brass tree. It was in our original studio, and we brought it back to the new studio. And so it was important for us that the depth of the practice get brought home so that yoga looks in any and every which kind of way. And that's sort of the history to take you through yoga.
That was comprehensive.
Yeah, 20 years of my own study, 8 years of development, and the slides go back and get redone just about every year. And then sometimes I like overdo it, and because I wanted to always include my original vision was the Mayan culture, China, Mesopotamia, and whatever. And so Rita later took a section. So they went out and studied this new Mayan yoga that's still being developed. They just never really went with it. So she would do this section of the teacher training where she would teach sort of the Mayan culture, but it just wound up being a um, a slideshow of her visit, her trip down to Mexico.
Okay.